Morning guys, I just wanted to make a quick video because I've been informed about Congresswoman Susan Wild and her speech last night in Congress. She basically wants to go ahead with an act called the Philippine Human Rights Law. And this particular act, or this particular law in America, would stop funding from the United States to the Philippines for police assistance and military assistance. This is in response to the anti-terror bill of the Duterte administration, which is designed to stop terrorist atrocities from taking place in the Philippines. I think this is incredibly hypocritical for a number of reasons. Firstly, there have been terrorist attacks in the Philippines and many people have lost their lives as a result. Why is it fair or right that Western countries have an anti-terror bill and the Philippines is not allowed to have the same? Why is it right that American citizens are protected from terrorist atrocities by having an anti-terror law, and yet in the Philippines America will not allow the Philippines to have the same rules or the same laws? And why is it right that this Congresswoman wants to cut off much needed funding, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Philippines needs all the funds it can get? Why is it right that this American Congresswoman wants to cut off military funding, which will mean it will be more difficult for the Philippines to police against anti-terror? This is absolutely hypocritical. It's perfectly okay for a Western democracy to defend themselves against terror, but now they are putting obstacles in place so the Philippines cannot do the same. Whenever President Duterte speaks about President Trump, he calls him President Trump. This lady says Rodrigo Duterte's brutal regime. What brutal regime? A regime or a country that's protecting its citizens, a country that's putting a massive amount of resources into protecting people against COVID-19, that has so many different measures in place to protect the people, a country that's trying to stop its young people getting involved in terrorism and terrorism ideals. Who is this woman? She's thousands of miles away from the Philippines. She's probably never been to the Philippines in her life. And yet she wants to put this so-called Philippines human rights bill. I don't understand how this is going to help America. I don't understand how this is going to help the American people. I don't understand why all these labor organizations in America are getting involved when they have nothing to do with the Philippines whatsoever. The problem is, in the Philippines, there are organizations that are disguised as working organizations, political organizations, and the problem is, as has been said before, there are risks with this. There are people in these organizations who maybe support terrorist ideals. I'm not going to go ahead and I'm not going to name them. I've got no right to name them. I'm not a Philippine citizen. This is not what this video is about. The purpose of this video is incredibly simple. This Congresswoman wants to stop funding for the Philippine military and the Philippine police. How can the Philippine military and the Philippine police protect against terrorism if their funding source has been cut off? So God forbid, if there was a terrorist attack in the Philippines and the Philippine government didn't have the resources for the police or the military, what would happen? Lives would be lost. So again, it's perfectly right for people in America suspected of terrorism to be held without charge, to have surveillance and everything else, and yet the America is dictating to the Philippines how they carry about their own anti-terror laws. What on earth has it got to do with America, how the Philippines conducts itself? What on earth has it got to do with this Congresswoman? What happens in the Philippines? President Duterte wants his very best for the Philippine people. I feel very, very strongly about this issue, because the problem is, like the EU Hannah Newman, this Congresswoman in America has probably listened to fake news coming out of the Philippines, is probably listening to all these news about the anti-terror law and the risks with that. The fact is, it's how the anti-terror law is going to be used. The anti-terror law is going to be used to protect the lives of the Filipino people. Of course, if it's found out that the anti-terror law is used in a wrong way, then of course there could be something to say. But right now it's all speculation. Right now the West, if you like, are dictating how the Philippines conducts its business, how the Philippines protects its own citizens, and I believe this is entirely wrong. So to this Congresswoman, who is thousands of miles away from the Philippines, has probably never been to the Philippines in her life, and is listening to fake news of the likes of CNN and Rappler, I really don't understand how what she's going to do is going to protect the Philippine people at all. In fact, cutting off the funding of America to the Philippine police and the Philippine military may make the Philippines more vulnerable. I don't know the amount of money that America is spending right now. This is not a message against America. I have American friends. I love America. That's not what the issue is. The issue is this particular Congresswoman is causing a lot of problems, and her video is a real shame, and her address is a real shame, and I believe she's not caring about the interests of the Philippine people. This Philippine human rights law, as she calls it, is not for the Philippine people. It's for her own vested interests and the vested interests of her supporters. So I really do hope that somebody educates this Congresswoman that realistically what she's doing is not helping the Philippine people, cutting off funding for the Philippine people at this very difficult time. Thanks very much.